Hello. In this video, welcome by the way. In this video, we will look at cathedrals in England, the Anglican cathedrals. And here I placed put yellow pins on all of the cathedrals here in England, except that one in Gibraltar, of course. But these are the cathedrals then, the Anglican ones in England. And in this video, we'll have a look at and see that there is an order to the exact location of the cathedrals. And that order is between distances between cathedrals. And the order is provided by the units of measurement and the ratios between them, precisely the ones we have here to measure distance. So the cathedrals are sort of locked into place and ordered by this pattern that you find when you measure and compare distances between cathedrals, which is what I have done and what I'm going to show you here. This order that determines the location of cathedrals here. And it's not only in England it is like that with cathedrals. It's true for all countries, basically, the majority of them at least, where I've measured in Europe and also in Mexico. Cathedrals are ordered by this pattern, the very location of them. But the first example here is cathedrals in England. And I'll begin to show you this pattern that locks the cathedrals into place, more or less, determines their very location. And I'm going to do that by showing you distances between cathedrals and the exact ratios that orders the distances. And here we have cathedrals in southern England, and I've drawn out a couple of lines here, and coming in pairs of distances. And these are ordered by two ratios, the ones I will start with. And those are the ratios between the meter and the yard, and between the kilometer and the mile, the very units we use today to measure distance. And the first examples I begin to show you then are these, is it 6 or 7 pairs of distances? Well, I'll take them as I go along here, and I'll start off with showing you that we will find, when we compare these distances, as I said, in pairs, the very ratio between the meter and the yard or the kilometer and the mile appears here, very exactly when you compare the distances precisely within the footprints of these cathedrals. So let's start here, and I'll just start. I click this away and begin with the first pair of these. And that's two distances here. Between, if I zoom in a little bit, here we have the distance between this line, between Exeter Cathedral and Bristol Cathedral. We'll compare that with the one between Wells and Oxford Cathedrals. And the distance here, Exeter to Bristol, is as 1 yard, compared to Wells to Oxford, which is as 1 meter. So we find the same numbers here come up in yards here, as we do in meters here, within the footprints of the cathedrals. So I think I'll just begin to measure this one. So you'll see that I'm not just talking here. This is how it is. So let's fly down first to Exeter and measure to Bristol here in yards. Here we have Exeter Cathedral, and we'll measure from this end of the cathedral and go up to Bristol then. So to Bristol Cathedral. And here we have Bristol Cathedral, and if you look in the little measure tool here, the window, we find the distance of 113, and let's say 11368 right here, 11368, 11368, 0 in yards. So remember 11368, and then we'll measure in meters the other distance here. If I zoom out a little bit, which is then the one we'll compare, and that's Wells to Oxford. So let's fly down to Wells. And here, Wells to Oxford, we'll find 113,680 in meters. Exactly the same numbers we just had in yards. So let's measure. From Wells to Oxford, to Oxford. So here we have Oxford Cathedral. And if you look in the little measure tool here, the distances, we find 11368 here in meters, exactly the same numbers we had in yards previously. So that then means that the ratio between these two distances is as 1 yard to 1 meter. The first here, Exeter to Bristol, 1 yard, and then Wells to Oxford, 1 meter is the ratio between those two. And now I'll add one more example here where we find the ratio between the meter and the yard. So let me add two distances here. And those are both measured from Worcester Cathedral up here, down to Winchester Cathedral and Salisbury Cathedral. And the first distance is as 1 meter, and the second distance here as 1 yard. So let's measure that and see. First in meters from Worcester to Winchester. So we're flying down to Worcester Cathedral. And in meters from here to Winchester. And here we are at Winchester Cathedral, and we're looking for a distance a little bit over 140,042. You can see it there in the measure tool. 140,42 meters. Let's now shift to yards and measure to Salisbury Cathedral, where we should find then 140,420 in yards. And here is Salisbury Cathedral. We find that just when we reach the cathedral, 144,220 yards within the footprints again. So there again we had the ratio between 1 meter and 1 yard in two cathedral distances here, in these two first examples. So let me take the second example away now, the one I just showed you, and I'll add one more distance here, and I'll also take away that distance. And now we look at the relationship between these two. Bristol Cathedral to Salisbury and Wells Cathedral again to Oxford. This time the distance between Wells to Oxford is as 1 mile. Think of this as 1 mile. Then the distance between Bristol Cathedral and Salisbury Cathedral is as 1 kilometer. That's the very ratio here, 1 kilometer to 1 mile. Let's measure that. First from Wells to Oxford again, but this time in miles here. So we can measure from here and up to Oxford. So here we are, and we find a distance of around 70.64 in miles, as you can see in the measure tool. 70.64 here. And that's what we're going to find in kilometers in the second distance here, between Bristol and Salisbury. So let's measure that. And here we have Bristol Cathedral, and we'll measure to Salisbury then. And we're looking for 70.64 kilometers here, which we find just here within the footprints. As you can see in the measure tool, 70.64 kilometers, the same numbers we just had in miles. So let me keep these two now, and I'm going to add two more distances. These two right here, as measured from Winchester to Salisbury, and then Winchester to Guildford Cathedral. Now we have it such that Winchester to Salisbury is as 1 kilometer, while Winchester to Guildford Cathedral is as 1 mile within the footprints here. So let's measure now from Winchester first to Salisbury in kilometers. You can measure from here in the footprint of the cathedral to Salisbury. And we'll find a distance of, let's say, 33.87 in kilometers here. That's right there, you see it in the measure tool, 33.87 kilometers. So let's shift to miles now and measure from Winchester to Guildford, where we should then find 33.87 in miles. So let's measure that. Again from around here and to Guildford. And here we are at Guildford Cathedral, and if you look in the measure tool there, we find this 33.87 miles here, right here, the same numbers we just had in kilometers. So that's that pair. Let me just continue to add pairs here, and this kilometer-mile ratio will appear a couple of more times here. Now I'm adding these two distances, Chichester to Salisbury and Chichester to Guildford. So these two distances here, as measured from Chichester Cathedral to Guildford and Salisbury. Here we have Chichester to Guildford is 1 kilometer, while Chichester to Salisbury is 1 mile. Again. So let's measure that, first in kilometers then, Chichester to Guildford. And here we have Chichester Cathedral, and we'll measure from sort of the farthest end here of the footprint of the cathedral, let's say there, up to Guildford. And here we get the distance in kilometers to the farthest reach, if you will, of Guildford. That is 47.04 kilometers. Right there we have it, 47.04 kilometers. And that's what we'll find in miles in the next distance. So let's fly back to Chichester and measure to Salisbury then. And here we measure from this end of the cathedral, the nearest end to Salisbury, and we'll fly there now. So here we should find 47.04 in miles to Salisbury. And here we have Salisbury Cathedral, and if you look in the measure tool, you see 47.04 in miles, just when we reach the cathedral here. Right there it is. The same numbers we just had in kilometers in the other distance. So that's that pair. Let's now bring up the last pair, if you're tired of this, the last pair of distances that I'm going to show here. And that's Winchester Cathedral to Bristol and Winchester Cathedral to Exeter Cathedral. And here again the ratio is 1 kilometer in the first distance and 1 mile in the second. So let's now fly down to Winchester and measure these. And first in kilometers to Bristol Cathedral. And we'll measure this distance from this end of Winchester Cathedral, right here, up to Bristol. And here we have Bristol Cathedral again, and the distance we're looking for here is 99.75 kilometers. And that we have right here, 99.75 kilometers. And that's what we're going to find in miles in the next distance. So let's fly back to Winchester and measure to Exeter. And this time we start measuring from the opposite end of the cathedral, over here, and fly to Exeter, where we should then find 99.75 in miles. So let's see. Here we have Exeter Cathedral, and at this end, the opposite end of the cathedral, we find 99.75 in miles. Then exactly the numbers we just had in kilometers. So those were the distances that I wanted and correlations that I wanted to show in this video. And if I add all of the distances that I showed you, it's all of these ones. And you could see how the meter-yard ratio first ordered distances between cathedrals. and then a number of examples of how the kilometer-mile ratio provided the order to the distances between cathedrals. So, and I should add here that I have many more examples of both how the meter and the yard ratio and the kilometer-mile ratio orders cathedral distances here in southern England, many more. But this was just the first sample and an introduction, if you will. But in the next video, I thought I'd get back to focusing just on one ratio here between cathedrals in England, the one between the kilometer and the mile, and move north in England and show how commonly that ratio orders cathedrals here, you can say in and around Yorkshire here in northern England. And I'll give many examples of that so you see how common it is. That when you compare one distance between cathedrals, you find 1 kilometer relative to the next one when you find 1 mile as a ratio between the two. It's very common here, and I show you a good number of examples of that. So this is scratching the surface of showing how there is very much an order, this unit of measurement ratio order, ordering the exact location of cathedrals. And you see it when you compare distances like this between cathedrals. This order becomes apparent. And I started to show it here to you by showing you how the meter and the yard and the kilometer-mile ratio orders cathedrals down here. But you can continue here and just find these two ratios and others ordering cathedral distances all around England. And as I said initially, it's not just cathedrals in England. This is the case also with cathedrals in other countries in Europe, such as France, Spain, and Italy, to mention a few. And I've also found this order between cathedrals in Mexico. But the starting point is here, cathedrals in England, and I'll continue with that in the next video. So if you managed to watch this far, if this didn't bore you completely, then thank you very much for that, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.